A story, Joe, Latif, and Laksha. When Joe was a second-year international affairs student in a university in Cebu City, he obtained funding to join the school team participating in an international Model UN competition in Sydney, Australia. At the height of the competition, Joe made plenty of new friends and became particularly close to Latif from the Malaysian team. The two first started talking when Latif knew where Joe was from. Upon discovering that Joe was from the Philippines, Latif lit up and declared that he was a big fan of Filipino actors Jericho Rosales and Christine Hermosa. Joe was pleasantly surprised to learn that Latif had seen every episode of the ABS-CBN telenovela, Pangdako Seo. The show had aired on Malaysian TV a few years back, and its two stars had developed a modest following. Ashamed that he did not know as much about Malaysia as Latif knew about the Philippines, Joe asked Latif what his country was like. Latif, he discovered, was from a Muslim university in Kuala Lumpur. Joe asked him what he liked best about living in KL, and Latif immediately mentioned the food. Latif explained that in Kuala Lumpur, one can find Chinese, Indian, and Malay cuisines. He told Joe that this assortment of foodways was the result of how British reorganized Malaysian society during the colonial times. The British did little to change the way of life of the Malays who were the original residents, but brought in Chinese laborers to work in the rubber plantations and tin mines, and Indians to help manage the bureaucracy and serve as the initial professional core of the potential middle class. One of the ways that these ethnic groups were identified was through their foodways. According to Latif, Malaysia eventually became famous for these cuisines, which can be found in the various hawker centers across the nation's cities and towns. These food stands are located in outdoor food parks where locals and tourists taste the best of Malaysia, from nasi lemak to laksa. Joe interrupted Latif and asked, "What is laksa?" He felt more ashamed at his lack of knowledge. Let me show you what it is and how it is prepared," replied Latif. The next day, Latif took Joe to a Malaysian restaurant a few blocks away from the university. Joe was surprised to discover that Malaysian food was readily available in Sydney. Having noticed this, Latif explained to his Filipino friend that, over the years, as more and more students from Malaysia moved to Sydney to study, Malaysian restaurants followed suit. Soon after, they were catering not only to these students, but Australian-born Sydneysiders as well, whose culinary tastes were becoming more and more diverse. Joe finally had his first taste of laksa rice noodle soup in spicy coconut curry sauce. He found the flavors intense since, like most Filipinos, he was not used to spicy food. However, in deference to his friend, he persisted and eventually found himself enjoying the hot dish. After the meal, Joe and Latif went to a nearby cafe and ordered flat whites, an espresso drink similar to latte, which is usually served in cafes in Australia and New Zealand. Both knew what flat whites were since there were Australian-inspired cafes in Malaysia and Cebu. The new friends promised to keep in touch after the competition and added each other on Facebook and Instagram. Over the next 2 years, they exchanged emails and posts, congratulated each other for their achievements, and commented on and liked each other's photos. Latif sent his mother's recipe to Joe, and the latter began cooking Malaysian food in his home. A few years after graduation, Joe moved to Singapore, joining many other overseas Filipino workers off in the city-state. The culture was new to him, but one thing was familiar: the food served in Singapore was no different from the Malaysian food he had discovered through Latif. He would later learn from Singaporean colleagues that the island country was once part of the British colony of Malay and the post-war independent Federation of Malaysia. Singapore, however, separated from the Federation in August 1965 and became a nation-state. Today, they may be two distinct countries, but Singapore and Malaysia still share the same cuisine. After he settled down in his apartment, Joe sought out and found a favorite Laksha stall in Newtown Hawker Center. He would spend his weekends there with friends eating Laksha and other dishes. One Saturday, while Joe was checking his Facebook feed along the very busy Orchard Road, Singapore's main commercial roadhead, noticed that Latif just posted something 5 minutes earlier. It was a picture from Orchard Road. Surprised but also excited, Joe sent Latif a private message. Latif replied immediately saying that he too had moved in Singapore and was, at that moment, standing in front of a department store just a few blocks away from where Joe was. The two friends met up, and after a long hug and quick questions as to what each was up to, they ducked into a cup and renewed their international friendship by ordering a pair of flat whites.